There's power in taking a photograph. There's power in being an artist.
It's the Phoenix Film Revival Podcast.
All right, welcome to another episode of the Phoenix Film Revival Podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Yannicone, and I have with me Stacy Yannicone.
Hello, hello.
And we also have Frank Thorp.
The fifth.
Hi, thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Do you go with the five? Like, do you always put the fifth in?
So, I mean, it's a long story. I'll make it super short. I am the fifth, and I put the fifth there because my father is kind of like in the public, he was in the Navy, and so he was like in the public affairs space. And as a journalist, I had to kind of differentiate myself because I would actually call people. There was a time when I would call people at the Pentagon, and they'd be like, "Oh yeah, Admiral Thorp. Yes. What can I get you?" And like, no. This is his son. So, so I started putting the V there. It is, it's. I think I'm like the only V that I know of. But yes, I put the V there because my father is kind of in the same space.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, and you often don't hear people go up quite that high. Like I think I know maybe a couple thirds.
I know. No, it's actually very cool. I mean, all the Frank Thorps were, in the military, and I mean, the first Frank Thorp, carried Abraham Lincoln's casket.
Oh, man.
And I mean, like, there's this very long history of it's a very cool legacy to be a part of. So I'm very proud of it. So which is another reason why I use the suffix. So
yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. So you wear a lot of hats. So you're, let's say, journalist, reporter, producer, photographer. There are probably a couple others in there. Yeah. You wear a lot of hats.
Yeah. So I work for NBC News as a producer and off-air reporter, which is. It is, I mean, basically, it's like a Swiss Army knife kind of job. It's a situation where you're doing all the jobs, for a broadcast journalism outfit that you can do. So, which is a lot of, it's like for the producer aspect of it, it's a lot of logistics. It's a lot of, making sure that our camera crews are where they need to be. It's making sure that we know where we can be, and where we should be, what we should be covering, and all of those kinds of things. That reporter aspect of my job is a lot of editorial stuff. It's building sources, it's talking to people, it's making sure that we know what's happening before it happens. It's making sure that, say, when there's an impeachment trial, we know the mechanics of that and the way that kind of stuff works. And so, but another part of my job is the visuals too. And, as working for a news organization, particularly one as sprawling as NBC News, we have a lot of different platforms. The main one, obviously, being video, which is our network, and that's Today Show and Nightly News, and but then also our material also goes to MSNBC. There's NBC News Now, which is our streaming platform, and so I shoot a lot of video too, and which is a big part of my job in terms of if it's coverage of things, or if it's interviews, or if it's throwing up an extra camera for an interview that we have a cameraman working on. But then the photography part of my job is the one that is a little bit different. It's actually not particularly. It wouldn't necessarily like fall within the wheelhouse of my job description so much. I think everybody who does these jobs and covers the news takes pictures, and that is used either on a personal basis or sometimes for the news organization, for social media and things like that. But my passion for photography has always kind of moved a little bit further, and so what I've done is kind of incorporated that a lot into my job. And so I use a lot of photography when I work, either if it's covering the Hill or in other places too.
Very, very cool. So you do a lot of work in the Capitol. Are you there mostly, or is it kind of like a mix? I mean, at least the photography part of it seems to be based in the Capitol.
Yeah, so I cover the Hill. I cover the Senate, the U.S. Senate. So in my office, my computer, my workspace is in the U.S. Capitol. And I've been covering the Capitol. I've been covering the Hill for 12 years now. So I was covering the House for a while. I went on the campaign trail, covered 2016 for a bit, which is the Trump campaign. And then I've covered the Senate ever since. So I've been there for a long time. But I mean, we get deployed to do different stories depending on breaking news and things like that. But my beat specifically is the U.S. Senate and or Congress, but specifically the U.S. Senate. And so I go to the Capitol almost every day. And I mean, like a part of that is, Congress is one of those things that you kind of have to be there in the building to cover it. Not only from like a visual standpoint. I mean, obviously you can't take pictures of lawmakers when you're not there, but also from a reporting standpoint, one of the beauties about covering Congress is that there are 435 lawmakers or members of Congress, 100 senators, but then also all of their aides and all of their staff and stuff like that. So I mean, there's a unlimited number of people that you need to get to know to make sure that you do that job well, and so being there on the ground is important.
Okay, so it's interesting. You have offices there. For some reason in my head, I never would have realized, so every news outlet that's there has their own area where you're all kind of in this one space where you actually have offices that are in the building. So
we have
I wouldn't have.
We have little booths actually. They're kind of. I don't have any windows in my booth. It's very, it's a tight quarters. There's just 3 spaces, bunch of laptops or, a bunch of computers and screens and things like that. But yeah, that's where we work every day. And we're very lucky to be able to work there. It's a very cool place to, walk into every day to work. But also, from a proximity standpoint, you have to be there in the building to cover this place. And so it's important to be there with the lawmakers and with the staff so that we're able to run down when something happens on the Senate floor or run down when something happens that's particularly crazy. January 6th being an example, you have to be there for that kind of stuff.
Yeah. How does that happen? So if something's going down, is there just a word of mouth that goes on through, or everyone just starts getting text messages, or how does the it's just hey, something's going on. You hear someone yelling.
It depends. And that goes to the whole idea of the editorial part of the job, right? Is so for instance, right now they're in recess. It's August, and so one of the big parts of this, this time, or what we use this time for, is sitting down with folks, getting coffees with folks, so that we are able to build relationships with people, so that when things like that happen, they reach out and they be like, hey, something crazy is happening. Or if something crazy is happening and you hear about it on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it, that it's that you're able to kind of reach out and confirm that information or get more information about an incident that's happening. Or, if it's even legislation, or if it's, it could be a security situation, it could be something as mundane as when the government funding bill is going to be voted on. It's a huge spectrum of things that we have to make sure that we're on top of. And which is part of the reason why I like the job, is because it's not really confined to one specific subject and one specific, group of people. There's a lot of things to cover, which is overwhelming at times, but it's also exciting. So
yeah, I can imagine it's probably busy in there at all times, correct? Even if people aren't around, there's people around in the building. Do you have free range to just go where you want in there, or are you kind of limited on the areas that you can be?
Yeah, so most of the places that we can go in the Capitol, and most of the places in the Capitol that are open to congressional staff are open to members of the press. Now, there are certain restrictions on reporters, particularly television reporters. For instance, on the Senate side of the Capitol, we're not allowed to shoot video anywhere unless we have previous approval, which is a total pain. And it's a real, and it makes it a lot harder for us as TV journalists to do our job. But, for still photographers, we actually, the restrictions there are way fewer. Still intense. For instance, the only time a journalist has shot photos of the Senate floor, I think probably in recent memory, is January 6th. And that was because it was such an incredible, breach of security and protocol that there were photojournalists that had made it into the gallery and shot that stuff. But the rules are very intense in terms of where you can shoot and where you can't.
Yeah.
And so, but like I said, you know, for still photographers, there are a lot more opportunities to capture images in the Capitol than there are for video reporters.
Okay, very cool. Do the politicians know who all of you are by name? I know you were saying you have to make, you know, relationships with everybody, by other politicians, and like they like, hey, Frank, like.
Yeah, I mean, you know, over the years, you kind of build relationships with a lot of them.
Yeah.
You know, I always make it a point to kind of like reintroduce myself to people and senators and lawmakers, even though I know that they probably know who I am, like just because I bugged them 100,000 times. And it's, you know, I mean, it's the, you know, 27th time that I've asked John Tester about, you know, a commerce secretary nominee. Like, you know, he knows who I am. It's just, you know, but it's good to kind of just, you know, be respectful and be like, hey, you know, that's Frank Thorp, NBC. Just, and also like from, you know, an outlet, you know, they know who we are, but also it's good for them to kind of be reminded of what outlets are asking questions and things like that. But yeah, I mean, you do kind of create relationships with lawmakers, and which I think that kind of, I mean, it helps from a reporting standpoint, because I mean, human nature is such that, you know, if a random person approaches somebody and is like, hey, and throws a recorder in somebody's face and starts asking a question, it's off-putting. It can be off-putting. So you have to kind of do it in a respectful way, in a way that kind of builds that relationship. But I mean, again, like that goes back to the whole idea of using time to sit down with aides and sit down with lawmakers. And I mean, we also have meetings with lawmakers too, where we just kind of get to sit down and get to know them, so that we're able to, when that kind of stuff happens, we're able to approach them in a way where they feel comfortable with us.
Okay, that makes sense. How many reporters are in there at a time usually, like give or take, like as far as like, so photographers, like how many photographers would you say are there? Like you're all taking photos?
It's a good question. It depends on the news day. Like, you know, it's the news, what's happening in the news, you know, I mean, if it's a big, you know, news situation where everybody's focusing on, you know, one side of the Capitol or the other, there will be dozens of photographers and reporters. I mean, and the whole hallway will be stacked full of reporters chasing after lawmakers, and big scrums, and, you know, piles of cameramen and all kinds of things. There will also be times when nobody cares about, I mean, because I cover the Senate all the time. So it's like the times when things are crazy, and then it's also times when things are not crazy. And there are some, you know, certain times when there's just a handful of folks who are covering it. I mean, when you're talking about certain times like impeachment or, you know, big, massive, like post-January 6th things, I mean, there are hundreds of reporters in the Capitol. And so it just really depends. But I mean, again, and this is where, you know, a lot of folks will come in, rightfully so, and like this is their job. You know, they can't always just cover the Capitol all the time. A lot of news outlets can't dedicate staff specifically to covering the Capitol. But that's where sometimes it comes in handy, being the person that is there every day. You know, because it's that level of institutional knowledge and that understanding of the people around, like that they know that you're there all the time, that helps you build the relationships to do good reporting, and also for them to feel comfortable with you sticking a camera in their face all the time, which lawmakers are actually pretty used to, but it's just something that is helpful, is having those relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. To know who the players are, and I can imagine that's a big deal. I mean, there's a lot of people, I'm sure, running around, and if you don't know who they are, you don't know who the subject, you know, would be. That absolutely makes sense. So switching back kind of into photography with film, so you go through security, I'm assuming, every single day, right? So how's the film work? Are you bringing that in? Do you just keep a storage of it in you keep stuff there, like on site, or you bring that stuff in every day and be like, can you hand check this? Like, how's that work?
So there's a couple aspects to that. First off, you have to remember that like film used to be the way that they did it, right? So it's like, while it's new, I think, for, you know, not so many photographers bring film into the Capitol now, and security is obviously much more heightened, you know, for a number of different reasons, a lot of different, you know, recent security events that have upped security. It's not like a totally new idea of people bringing film into the Capitol. But I will say that, like, so I actually have a letter that I have specifically printed out from what's called the Sergeant at Arms that says that there is an exception, so that they can actually hand check. It's effectively the same process that if you were to go through security at the airport and ask them to hand check your film, they'll do the same thing for me at the Capitol. And it's kind of become like a comical situation where the Capitol police officers know I'm the guy that brings film in all the time. And it's like, oh, okay, I gotta do this again.
They know exactly.
But it's cool. And I mean, I think that, I'm not I'm probably the only one that brings it in regularly. But I'm not the only one that comes in and shoots, film. There's a bunch of different, photojournalists that come in either on special occasions or, just like occasionally that will bring film in. But I don't typically, hoard it in the Capitol because the Capitol police officers are actually pretty good about making sure that it doesn't run through the mags. But there have been times when I've brought in, a couple boxes of 4x5 just so I have it in the Capitol so I don't have to worry about rushing it in or anything like that. But like I said, they're actually pretty good about being respectful and understanding that it's important not to run it through the X-ray machines.
Yeah, that's good. Do you have a stash fridge where you got film just frank on a lunch bag?
Yeah, honestly, it's like I open my bag and they're like, "Oh, you got film?" I'm like, "Yep." I'll bring in preloaded holders a lot because I'll try to. There are certain places in the Capitol that are super dark, but they're not very private, and there's always the risk of somebody opening the door and ruining everything, which is my total nightmare. And so, I try to preload a lot of my holders before I go to the Capitol. But they're usually very good about that, and they understand that that's what I'm doing. And again, I've been coming to the Capitol through the same security door for, 12 years basically. So, these guys know who I am. I'm a pretty known quantity, and I'm still checked, and they still check me. But it's also they know that I'm not some random guy trying to sneak something into the Capitol.
Yeah, sure. Makes it easier. I know some airports they will refuse to hand check people's film. Yeah. They just got to send it through. And good luck.
It's scary.
It's I
went on an assignment in Arizona, actually in Arizona. Where is your House of Representatives? Is it in Phoenix, or is it in Tucson?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I did a portrait series with Rusty Bowers, who is the House Speaker in the House there, and he was one of the people that had testified before the January 6th committee. And so I did this whole photo essay with portrait series with a bunch of people who had participated in that committee and kind of been wrapped up in that entire investigation. And there were just a number of different times where I was terrified of how my film could just get totally destroyed and things like that. But that was my total nightmare, is that the idea of shooting that portrait session and then getting back to the airport and then being nope, I'm sorry, you're going to have to run that through the huge X-ray machine that is going to zap all your film. And I was like, I don't even know what I would do. I would cry. It would be terrible. It would be so awful. So, but I've actually not encountered a situation where somebody's been a jerk about that. So I've been very lucky. I think that most airports are pretty good about it.
Knock on wood, huh?
Yeah.
I know, knock on wood.
Yeah.
I've heard stories, and I'm like, oh no. I always feel bad. I always feel they always give you kind of the grumpy look, especially if you have a lot of film, and they're like, oh.
Yeah, I think the last time we traveled, we're just blast it. Just go for it.
Really?
That's what you're doing the photography with. Yeah, I know.
Right.
I had a roll. I was sort of testing it out. I'm like, well, I'm going to send it through X-ray. And I went back and through. And then I went to a building that did an X-ray. And my bag was in the X-ray. My bag was literally just sitting in the X-ray. And I'm like, ooh, that's a bit much. And
oh, no.
It was a weird looking roll for sure. It was
there are different X-ray machines that do worse things to film, right?
Yeah. It's
the ones that look like jet engines. Those are the ones that are really going to ruin your film.
Yeah.
But there are still the old style box ones that are, they're not great for your film, but it's not going to totally destroy it, particularly if it's low ISO or something like that.
Yeah, they say the threshold's 800 or something like that, but still.
Yeah. Yeah.
When in doubt, just have them hand check it if you can.
Do you ever use a lead bag for your stuff when you travel?
So I I don't, because so I don't know if have you ever done this before, but like I used to, and what it would do is it would flag them even more. So what would happen is that you would run it in with the lead bag, which isn't always like 100% effective, and then they would see it in the X-ray and be like, wait a second, what is that? Because like there's like the one thing that they couldn't see through, and they'd be like, oh wait, we're gonna run that through again, and then all of a sudden you're running your film through twice. And so I did that like once and just realized that it was not worth it. It's always just worth kind of just asking them for a hand check. I guess, I mean, even if they forced you to run it through the X-ray, they would probably make you take it out of the lead bag, you know?
Yeah, true.
Yeah, it seems like it wouldn't. Yeah, I've seen that, and I'm like, what's that do? There's no way they're like not opening that anyways.
Yeah.
Right.
Lead bag
Totally.
makes sense to me.
Yeah.
So what kind of cameras are you using? It seems like quite a bit. Like from what I can gather, you have kind of a gamut there of like disposable all the way up to like pinholes, and like you're kind of everywhere.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that I try not to focus on like the same camera all the time. Most of the stuff that I do in terms of large format is with a speed graphic. And that's a camera that I got originally from a colleague, an old colleague of mine who passed away recently. And he had seen that I was shooting film on the Hill and was like, hey, I have all these cameras and I'd really love to, you know, kind of get rid of them because I don't really use them anymore. And so he like sold me all the speed graphic and a Super D and, you know, Graflex, you know. But I mean, I prefer the speed graphic because it allows you to have the flexibility with the lenses. You know, you can use different lenses. I have a Aero Ektar, which I use most of the time. But I also have like a Petzval lens that I got from Jeffrey Berliner at the Penumbra Foundation. And, you know, because it has a focal plane shutter, the flexibility there in terms of like what you shoot with in terms of lenses is, you know, endless, basically.
Oh, yeah.
And I love that. And so I do that for almost all of my large format stuff. But I have a Hasselblad that I was lent by a colleague of mine that I shoot with my medium format stuff with. I use a disposable camera. So this is, you know, the thing that I've been doing recently is like kind of like the antithesis of my 4x5 is the idea that I like started shooting with this ridiculous, you know, black and white, the Tri-X disposable cameras, which I have like them all over my darkroom.
Oh, awesome.
Because I've been taking them apart. They're actually like pretty easy to take apart because you just kind of like wind them and they actually wind back into the roll and you just like break it apart and there's, you know, it's just like a normal used roll of film. But it's actually it's super unique in that it allows for, first off, like super tight spaces and particularly dark spaces, which is a lot of the stuff that I encounter on the Hill. And it's also kind of, you know, it's obviously very portable and easy to use. It uses flash. Like, I'm not really going to get out of focus. And it kind of gives like this weird, funky, like 70s party vibe, which is, again, like not the vibe that Congress gives. And so, which is kind of a cool look, I think. And it's been a lot of fun to do because it just feels different. And then the pinhole, which is actually like right over here. It's ginormous. So my first experience in a dark room was actually in a workshop, like similar to what you guys do. But when that workshop was over, I was trying to find a dark room to use, and the Smithsonian actually used to have a dark room that you could do classes through, and like you could just use like open dark room. And I got to know like this group of people who had been using this darkroom for years. I mean, like decades. Like these people had been there forever, and they were just very cool, just passionate photographers who just loved the craft and like loved printing and loved being in the dark room. And they after the pandemic, they closed it. They closed the darkroom. Like it was like this darkroom that had been open forever, and they just closed it because they were just like. I guess the need wasn't there. They wanted to use the space for something else. It was really sad, actually. It was like just a total bummer that they did that. But I kept in touch with these people, and one of the women was like, hey, so, I have this like 11 by 14 pinhole. Like, are you interested in it? And I was like, why not? That sounds great. Okay, cool. And then during the, and I never used it before. I'd used it once at home. And then I was like, and the speakers race was happening for Kevin McCarthy to become speaker, and it dragged on. It was like one of the longest speakers races in history. And it was just dragging on to the point where it was like, there was like nothing to do. You would just sit there and you would just watch it drag on. And there was just like nothing. And I was like, all right, well, if I have like nothing to do but sit there and wait for it as it drags on, like, what kind of camera would be perfect for a long period of time? And so I lugged this thing into the gallery in like the chamber and put it up and left it up there for like an hour and a half. And it still wasn't enough time because it was like so dark in there, but it was just a cool, different way of covering an event like that. And I mean, like that kind of gets to the whole point of like why I do what I do in terms of the film work that I do, which is like, in an effort to try to differentiate the way that, I covered the place. I think that, a lot of coverage it's hard to make coverage of the Capitol look interesting and new and different. I guess my coverage of the Capitol maybe looks the opposite, which is like old and different. It's not new and different, it's old and different. But the idea of kind of giving people a different kind of view of the events that are happening is something that I kind of strive for through this work. And what I've actually found is that it's attracted people to Congress and like the stuff that I cover in a way that like they wouldn't necessarily be interested in the past. I've had people reach out and be like, oh my God, I could care less about what's happening in Congress, but like seeing your pictures like made me Google an article about what was happening on the Hill. And it's like, that's it. Like, that's it. I mean, and that's the coolest thing. The idea that, the work can kind of draw in more people, not only visually, like people who are passionate about photography, but also people who are interested in the news, like maybe tangentially, but also are like, oh, okay, well, that's actually super interesting. And like, I wonder what that's about. And then they look at it and they read about it. And so that's it. And so anyway, which is the longest way of answering all of the cameras that I use. So yeah.
No, it's a really good thing. I mean, I vaguely follow politics, but it always just makes me sad and angry. So in general, I try not to, just because I like to keep my news happy. I'm all about like, dogs and cats online. But yeah, no, it's interesting to be able to see, a lot of your photos put a lot of weight to the people that are, you hear about, everything's sort of, I don't know what the word is. Like the photos, when I look at the photos of the people that are there on Capitol Hill, you can really feel the weight of what they're feeling. And a lot of the time with politicians, they don't feel like they're human. They don't feel like people. And you're capturing a lot of like, oh, these are real people. They have real weight here. They really are concerned. And a lot of that doesn't come across in a lot of the stuff that we see normally that comes out of there, as far as videos and pictures. And a lot of your work really reflects the humans behind the people that are actually making these decisions. So it's really, really excellent work. It truly is.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I really
that means a lot.
I think I saw your work a while back when the impeachment, or saw you shooting 4x5 when the impeachment stuff was going on. And I'm like, is that guy shooting 4x5? He's actually shooting film. And I think I reached out to you. I was like, what film are you shooting? And
did you?
Yeah. And I remember what it was. I think it was Tri-X. But I don't know, just the different approach to covering the news is appreciated for sure.
Yeah, for sure. What do people think when you pull out like a disposable? Like, are your fellow like, like, do you get like kind of a side eye from people that you're shooting? Like, what is that a?
So, yes, and it's funny because I probably get more comments about the disposable camera in like a side-eye-ish look than I did with the 4x5, because people saw the 4x5 and they're like, oh man, that's a cool camera, like what are you doing with that?
Yeah,
I was like, oh yeah, it's like 1950s, like blah blah blah. And then I pull out the disposable camera, and I mean, everybody's used a disposable camera. The flash is like pretty intense, and I'm like up in people's faces, and we'll be up in scrums, and I'll be asking lawmakers questions, and like during breaks or during special moments, like I'll like hit the shutter, and like it goes. And they're like, "Whoa, what was that?" And like, it like stops the entire moment sometimes, which is actually not really a great thing. So yeah, it's actually it's funny. I think that there's like it's like a dumbed down version of the medium, in a way. I think that, but I also think that it's kind of it's very much capturing the moment. And I think that like whether or not it's like a glamorous moment or not, like whether or not their eyes are closed or open, like, whether or not their mouth is wide open and their hands are up in the air and stuff like that. I think that, it very much feels like, snapshots of what it is like to cover the hill. And I think that that's kind of what I like about it. I think that, the stuff that I do at 4x5, I have to be so deliberative, and like I have to really think about where I'm going to be shooting and what I'm going to be shooting and what the light is and like set it up and things like that. And this is kind of the opposite of that. I could get this effect with other cameras, and the digital cameras also would totally be able to fill that space as well. And I don't exclusively shoot with disposables. It's not like the only thing that I do, but I think that yes, I have gotten side-eye looks at the disposable. The answer is absolutely yes.
It forces you to be in the moment, that's for sure. We have a friend, Alex, and he's a DP, and his whole day is planning, and everything has to be like very set out. But when in his social and when he shoots for himself, it's pretty much disposable because he can just not think about it and just shoot the moment. He's like, I don't want to think about the settings. I just want to shoot the moments. So he switches over in his regular life.
And I think, and that's what that's the kind of moments that I like to capture the most is that, my job is a lot of planning. It's also very unpredictable, but I also think that like, it's those moments that you aren't necessarily expecting, or the moments that you don't necessarily appreciate unless you're looking for them. You know what I mean? And it's like the layered aspects of like where people are standing and like the way that they're talking and the things that you don't necessarily appreciate until you're like, oh, like this is an image. Like this is something that is interesting and compelling, and that like looking back at these pictures, 20 or 30 years from now, they'll be like, oh wow, that was like, this is an interesting snapshot of like what it was like to cover the hill during that time and like what those moments were like. And I think I like that. I like that idea. It's almost like street photography-ish, like in a way, but it's not. Because everybody expects to kind of get their picture taken on the hill, and that's kind of like the blessing and the curse, right? Like you can shove a camera in front of any of these lawmakers' faces, and they're not going to be weird or upset about it because like they expect it. And but kind of like capturing those like unique moments is what I try to do with the disposable, and I think that it's actually been really fun to do. It's like an interesting body of work that kind of just started out of nowhere. I just did it on a whim, and I now have like a bag over there full. I keep all of like the disposables that I break apart, and I have them like in a bag there. It's like full of these disposables, and it's fun. It's been a lot of fun.
Absolutely, and the name Disposable Congress is so good. it's so apt.
I know. I did that. I just again on a whim, and I was like, Disposable Congress, and I was like, oh man, that's actually how it really works.
It really works. So, it's such a perfect thing. Yeah. As soon as I read that, I'm like, oh my god, that's just so good.
Yeah, I like the fact that most people use disposable cameras for stuff that's completely not political. It's going to a concert or hanging out with your friends and stuff like that. That's kind of, I wouldn't say carefree, but kind of like that enjoyable aspect. But then you're using this format for something that's completely opposite of what it's usually
It's supposed to be so serious, and people don't think of disposables that way. It's a good way too for people to see it. Like, they have their place other ways too. They're not just like
totally
like a kid's camera or something like that. It's almost like the folks that like refuse to shoot on a Holga. No,
totally,
and it can have its place.
And that's kind of like part of the reason why I love it, right? Is like that it's it's like kind of like turning on its head like what you expect coverage of politics or the Hill to be, you know? And I think that, like, for instance, so NBC, like, being as cool as they are, they were CPAC, which is like the Conservative Political Action Committee. They do this, you know, convention that they have every year in DC. And I was like, hey, you know, like, I can go down there and shoot, you know, 4x5 portraits of people that are going there. You know, like, we could do a whole, you know, photo essay. And they're like, yeah, you know, you could do that. Like, or you could just take a bunch of disposables and like just shoot it that way. And I was like, okay, great, let's do it. And it was just so funky and different. And like, you know, people give you weird looks, but it's also like it's almost like knowing, you know, it's like a knowing, like, you'd be like, oh, okay, cool. Like that's fine. Like it almost, you kind of like blend into the crowd a little bit because it's almost like you're kind of like sightseeing around a place that you're covering. And so, but yeah, I agree. It's very much, it's like not the camera that you would expect, but I think that it's fun to try to use cameras that you don't expect to cover places like this. That's why the 4x5 I think has been so interesting. Is like, or even, I mean, like, whatever, it's like the medium format stuff too. It's like whenever you do that kind of stuff, it just kind of like turns everybody's expectations on their head. And I think that I like the idea of doing that. I like the idea of not only using that stuff with lawmakers that are not expecting it, but also like showing that kind of work as like a case study in the fact that like it's actually still viable.
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of the camera doesn't make the photo. I tell people all the time,
Totally.
like, you know, especially folks that come in first time shooting, they're, you know, are shooting on Film Workshop. And one of my big, huge things is you don't need a fancy camera to do this. You may find that you're not, you know, you'll find something that works for you that's not necessarily that really expensive camera. It's like, yeah, sure, Leicas are wonderful, but you might not be a Leica shooter. Like, it might be something completely different, you know? So I'm always telling people, you know, you can still have an amazing, interesting, compelling photo that's made from something as simple as a tin can with a hole in it. Like, it really
100%. 100%. And I mean, and that's the thing, is I really do like pushing myself in that regard. Like, I'm there are certain cameras that I like to use, but also, I mean, I very much agree that, you know, I mean, it's the camera that you have with you. And I mean, it's a cliche to say, but I mean, like, it's true. Like an image, you know, there are certain lenses that will give you effects that you might be looking for in certain moments, but, you know, a good image is a good image. And I think that, I mean, it's less about the camera that you're using. It's more about the framing and like the lighting and all those things that, you know, you can't really like just make appear by shooting with a Leica.
Yeah, absolutely. Did any of the lawmakers or any of them shooting? Like, did any of them keep cameras on them and shoot like what they're doing? I don't think I've ever seen that.
The only one that did was Patrick Leahy, and he's a senator, or he was a senator from Vermont, and he just retired. And so I actually did a whole thing with him, a whole piece with him about his photography when he retired. He was one of like the longest serving senators, but he like has like photo books that he's shot because he has. I mean, he was a very passionate photographer, and he did most of his stuff digitally. I mean, at least in recent times, but he was very proud of the fact that he was able to shoot. So, for instance, like during a bill signing, you know, when lawmakers are over the shoulder of the president while he's signing a bill, he would take out his camera and shoot over the shoulder of the president, which is like a unique view that no other photojournalist or photographer would ever be able to get. Yeah. And he really loved the idea that he was able to like give that view, which was different than anything anybody had ever been able to do before. So, but it's actually, it's funny. I've thought about, I'm actually bummed that I didn't think about this earlier, because I should have, before he retired, given him one of these disposables and be like, hey, go do whatever you want to do with this, and like bring it back, and we'll do it like in a day in the life of the senator or something like that. But I don't know. I'll find somebody who's willing to do it one of these days, and we'll see if it can make it work.
Yeah, that'd be great, because you always get the view of the reporter. You don't get the view of the actual person. Like, and they see things I'm probably sure that you guys can't get to it all. So, I mean, there are probably some security issues, but still they could kind of hang on to that stuff and then like later put it out and be like, here, this is what this looked like.
Most of the stuff that they do, unless they're in a skiff, which is like a, secure, compartmentalized classified area. I mean, they would be able to do it.
Yeah.
So you just have to find somebody who's like willing and interested in doing it in a way that is interesting. You know what I mean? Because like also a lot of these lawmakers are understandably guarded and like, for a lot of different reasons. And so they might not want to show you like the coolest, most intimate parts of their, the inner workings of their day. This is something that I've thought a lot about, actually. So I'll let you know if this turns out one of those days.
You start handing cameras out.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Your contact.
Exactly.
Turn two.
Totally.
Amazing.
Is there a type of camera that you would want to shoot with that you haven't yet, or have anything in mind that you would want to experiment with there?
So this is a good question. And I'm not really, I have the cameras that I like, that I use. You know what I mean? I mean, like there are definitely lenses that I think would be interesting to use on the speed graphic.
Yeah.
There's a guy that, manufactures, like Super Ds and attaches the Aero Ectar on there. So it's all like, put together. David Burnett, who's a particularly, amazing person and also photojournalist who has had like an amazing career. He shoots with one of those, which is like a Super D with like a Aero Ectar attached to it. But I mean, honestly, like I really do feel like I'm able to kind of like make my vision work with the stuff that I have, which I'm very lucky to be able to say. Now I think that there's definitely like, I don't know, there's other like different cameras that I'd like to try, I think, like, what's the one that, the actor who does, it's like the
wide
panoramic
lux?
Photos. What's that?
The wide lux or the...
Yes, the wide lux.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like I would...
Yeah, the dude.
Dude, yeah, yes, exactly. The dude bites. So I would love to try wide lux. I think that would be a very cool way if you could make it work in low lighting situations on the hill. Like panoramic views would be very cool because it's like a lot of times the scenes on the hill, there's like a scrum, but there's also like other things that are happening around you. And so like seeing those entire scenes would actually be very cool to do. But would be hard to do. So some kind of panoramic camera would probably be what I would try to do. But yeah, that's a good question. It's always, I mean, I would probably like to have a pinhole camera that's not. I have a medium format. I have a medium format pinhole camera, and I have an 11x14 pinhole camera. And so there's probably a good medium, like a middle ground there that I could probably use. That would be very interesting. But again, like talking about use cases, I've tried to think of like smart and cool use cases for pinholes on the hill, and it's tough because there's just so much happening and moving all at the same time.
Right.
So yeah, that's not a super exciting answer. That doesn't have like a long list of wants and desires. But
I totally understand it though. A lot of people ask me what my favorite camera is, and I'm like, well, I use my speed graphic for 4x5 stuff, and then I have a Rolleiflex, and that does cool stuff too. But those are pretty much my two go-to, and I'm pretty content with it. So I get that, and I totally have that feel. So.
Yeah, I'm always flipping out. Like I'll use this. I shoot with, we're unfortunately busy a lot of time. We don't get to shoot as much as we want to. We need to change that. I was shooting recently with Mr. Potato Head that I fashioned into a pinhole camera. He was a pain. He's a real pain to work with, but
Yeah.
I was using that for the longest time. I'm like, all right, I think I'm done with him now. But there for like a good chunk of months, I was like, that's all I was shooting on.
Yeah. I love that. I would, you know, and the thing is that, I mean, I would do that kind of stuff on the hill, but I don't think that I would be able to leave those kind of things without Capitol Police being like, what is that?
You look like a little bit like a lunatic.
Yeah.
Like, especially in the people that you're taking photos of, they have, in essence, you're taking it with, you know, a stare down with Mr. Potato Head. And you feel like a crazy person while getting your photo taken. Like, yeah.
Totally. And I think that, like, with this 11x14 box camera, like I had to sit with it the entire time because I couldn't. I mean, first off, you can't really leave stuff around the hill, but like, you know, the person that sold it to me was like, if you're doing an exposure with this camera, you have to write on tape, you know, this is a camera taking a picture. Don't touch it.
Don't touch it.
Because people will just like walk up to this stuff and be like, oh, that's interesting. Like, you know, what is that doing up there? And if they don't know what it is, then, you know, your entire exposure can be completely ruined. So, the thing is, though, I'm always like open to the idea of like new and different things, and that's why that's one of the reasons why I love having conversations like this and like listening to podcasts like yours. Like, you know, there are a lot of things that I still don't know about this medium. Like, I mean, and that's what, you know, I think you actually work on alternative. The
alternative stuff. Yeah,
which is like a whole
that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's all. There's so many roads you can go down.
Right.
It's kind of crazy.
I know.
And there's so many like alternative processes that people kind of forgot about. And then some people are bringing them back. And then every once in a while you hear about something, you're like, wait, that's a thing? Like, photography is fun that it has so many roads.
Totally. And I love the idea of trying to, I mean, the thing is that like, you don't want to just use those kind of alternative processes just to use them, right? Like, I mean, well, you can. I mean, and actually, like, sometimes I do that all the time. Like, I mean, I shoot, you know, film of my daughter all the time just because I like shooting film of my daughter. It doesn't really make sense. And, but, you know, because she's moving around so fast and I can't really capture her. But, like, you know, I think that, I mean, I would love to figure out, like, a way to, like, incorporate cyanotype into news coverage. Or, you know, I mean, the New York Times did that whole thing about, I forgot where it was, New York or New Jersey or something, with tintypes, where it was just like, you know, really cool, funky, like, just like, you know, vibey, like emotional, like portraits of people, you know, with tintypes, and like that kind of stuff is so cool to do, but you have to just you have to have the right kind of story to do it, right? Like the stuff that I did, the portrait series that I did with January 6th, it's like black and white. It's all very like different. It's environmental. It's all, you know, natural light kind of stuff. It works in that setting. It works for that story because that story is heavy. You know, that story is like the stuff that they're talking about is heavy. Right. But I mean, you can't always do it that way. You know, I mean, like I did a shoot a couple weeks ago that was not as heavy. And like, you know, I did it with color and like, which is just, I like to shoot in black and white, but you know, you shoot in color and it's like, okay, like that makes sense for that. You don't want to kind of like try to fit something, you know, a square into a round hole. In those kind of situations. So you just have to be smart about it. I don't know. I'm like fascinated by the idea of like just expanding the way that people see news. And that's one of the reasons why I love this so much, is like the idea of trying to like kind of push those barriers just a little bit more.
Yeah.
If there's one that we could recommend, it'd probably be Morton Sage. I think that would be a really cool one with politics, shooting as a journalist. It's a really fun process where you actually destroy your print. And so it gives this weird sort of effect of it kind of melting almost.
Yeah. If you've ever seen a Polaroid lift, it's that, but with silver gelatin printing. It's a little dangerous.
Oh, really?
You have to have good ventilation and respirators.
Oh, God.
And stuff.
Okay.
But Morton Sage is an amazing process. Yeah. And it would kind of look cool. It's like it has sort of a...
Yeah. It's got an interesting feel to it. There was a photographer or music video that was shot on film, or maybe it was digital, and then they converted every single frame of that video into contact print negative, so that way they can make a cyanotype print, and then they took a photo of all those cyanotypes and then merged it into a video and had the music sync up to it. Yeah. But it's a cyanotype music video essentially.
Yeah, which is really interesting. A lot of photographers started following the musician, and I think he's in Britain, and I can't remember his name right now, but his music's actually pretty good too. Yeah. I was like I started listening to him on Spotify. I'm sorry, I don't remember his name. But yeah, it was kind of an interesting way to use cyanotype. Like, oh wow, like someone made a video that it was like that mix. Like cyanotype's fun because you can kind of mix like digital like with Like, because it's kind of craft photography a little bit. It's sort of like that interesting mix. So you have a lot of, there's just a lot of weird options and weird things. It's interesting to see how people do their process. We were talking to Liz Potter, and she like mixes all the processes. She was like, well, I'm gonna Polaroid lift this, and then I'm gonna put that Polaroid lift on top of my silver gelatin print, and then I'm gonna like watercolor it. And people that are just kind of doing a mix of everything, kind of trying it out and seeing what works. It's always fun.
I love her work. She's and talk about somebody that like the passion overflows through her Instagram account. You know what I mean? Like, and just, I've actually like bought, I think I bought actually her last like emulsion lift book that she put out. I mean, just like the idea of having the passion and the time and like the ability and the creativity to kind of put that kind of work together is so impressive. It's something that I wish that I had. Like, it's like, I mean, mostly the time, but like it's just so cool. And again, like this is where, people, again, there are certain times when you try to mix mediums, and there's certain times when you try to use mediums for like covering something or shooting something that you wouldn't necessarily see in that way, and it doesn't work, right? Like, and I mean, I've tried that before and it doesn't work. And like, but there are, when it hits, like it hits. And that's where I feel like I am totally, one of the coolest things about like kind of going down all these roads and these rabbit holes is like the idea of kind of realizing that there are people that are passionate in the same way. And like that passion really comes out in their work, and I think when you kind of like add all of these different mediums together, like there are ways to show different scenes and different people and different stories that you're not used to seeing. And that's where I feel like, I mean, like I have always been encouraged to kind of like think outside the box, and like this entire like process, this entire medium, everything about it is like about that, you know what I mean? Like, and kind of like thinking outside the box. And that's what I love about it so much, is because like you can get really stuck in like the cookie cutter part of like, shooting with the Sony A9, like, and be like, okay, like cool. Like all those pictures, you can make pictures like that. Like they can look great, but also like they can all look the same too, And I think that any way that you can kind of differentiate that is important. So
Absolutely. So when did you get started in film? When was this? Was it, and how did you get started in film? Has this been a while, or?
So in right around like, it was probably like 2016, actually, 2015, 2016. So I've always been passionate about photography. I've done, photography work is mostly personal stuff. Almost like ever since I got a Sony Mavica with a 3.5-inch disc. When I was a kid, I saved up for that, and, I had to like pay my dad back in installations. But I think that, when I was doing a lot of like photography work. So Pete Williams used to be the justice correspondent for NBC News, and he was like my professional sensei. Like he was like, I mean, my North Star in terms of like, as a journalist, but also he is an amazing photographer. And we were talking, and he was like, hey, like, what are you up to? And he's like, are you shooting? I was like, oh, I was thinking about getting into film. And he's like, oh my God, like, what are you thinking about getting into? And I was like, oh, like one of those cameras that like you look into, like look down into. He's like, oh yeah, Hasselblad. Oh my God, I have 3. Like, come on over like to my house. Like you can borrow one. And so I borrowed that camera, and I still use it to this day because he doesn't shoot film anymore. In fact, like, so I'm sitting in my darkroom right now. The laptop that we are talking through is actually sitting on the sink that he lent me, which is like the darkroom sink. Like that's his enlarger right there.
Oh, nice.
And so he's like lent me this entire apparatus to like keep this passion going. And so, but like I said, I did a class at Art League in Alexandria, Virginia. It was just one of those like, darkroom 101s. I had never done darkroom before in high school. So it was like one of those things that I had never experienced. I never even seen a darkroom. I remember like watching them print the first print in front of me and being like, there's no way that this is how it really works, right? Like I was like, I had no idea. It was so exciting. And I mean, like, listen, I know that I sound like a like a nerd about this kind of stuff, and I'm like, like, oh, I get giddy and excited, but I still get giddy and excited, and that's what I love about it. It's like there's nothing cooler than going through the entire process of shooting a photo, like using film, getting the exposure right, developing the film by yourself, and then going into the darkroom and printing it and having it look nice. And like, it's a magical experience. And so, I caught the bug and just kind of like kept on going. And so, but like I said, it was one of those situations where I decided to bring the camera, like the Hasselblad, onto the hill, and these photographers that, have been photojournalists for decades. So like for them, shooting with film is old news. It's like they shot film back when it was everything, like the only thing that you could do, and now they look back at that being like, that was a pain in the ass. Like, why would you try to incorporate that in your life now when you could make your life so much easier with all this other stuff? But it's actually been really cool, because I think that there's also like a pretty like a strong contingent of like, older school photographers, but also some of the newer ones that are trying to continue to incorporate their film work in their editorial work. And so, it's a fun community to be a part of, and it's one that is actually super encouraging, and they've been like wonderfully helpful in guiding me in different ways, and so, which has been really great. I actually think that, it's a really cool community to be a part of. So
yeah. Film people are pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah,
they are. Yeah.
They really are.
Like
they're really good.
And it's fun to like have like everybody who, listen, like you can, go down, have a 2-hour conversation about Leicas and stuff like that. But also like you can talk to folks about like this, exactly what we're talking about, which is like, how can you think a little bit differently about the way that you cover things? Because the thing is like, I'm not anti-digital. Like, and that's the thing, is like, I shoot digital all the time. Like I actually really don't, I'm not like one or the other, you know what I mean? Like, right. I'm not like only film. And so I actually think that there's definitely always going to be a place for the new technologies that come, except for AI, and that's a whole nother conversation. But I think that, but I like the idea of having like a breadth of ways to show what you're covering. And I think that film still exists, and there's still like a passion for it, and it still looks different, and you can make it different. You can make it yours. And that's what I love about it.
Yeah. And you know what? I think that your film photography really, really excels, because film is so light dependent, and it's such an important part. It's an important part of all photography, but your sense of lighting is just outstanding. And I think it really, really matches up well with film, especially black and white film. I think a lot of people miss like how important the lighting is, and you nail it on your photos. That's one of the big things when I look at your photos. Like, the lighting always gets me. I'm like, oh my God, Frank, like, how are you? I'm imagining you're in this, like, I'm sure it's better lighting than I'm imagining, but for some reason I imagine not a lot of light in the situations that you're in, and you're working with film. And I'm like, how's he getting this light to look so good? So yeah, your senses are really good with film. So I'm glad that you're using film, because it goes. Do
you meter for your stuff?
There's two things to this. First off, to your point, thank you very much. That was an amazing compliment, and I will probably, fly high on that for, the next couple of weeks. But the one of the luxuries that I have is that, particularly on news events that I cover, there's lighting. And so, like, now, most of the time when you're walking through the hallways of Congress, particularly in the Capitol, it's terribly lit. It's awful. It's disgusting. So, like, you basically pick your spots. If there are certain places where there are doors and windows that natural light will come in and kind of like give shadows and things like that. But there are, probably millions of moments that I've decided not to take pictures because the light is just so crappy. And, but a lot of situations where like there are press conferences or events or things like that, like, they'll throw up a light or two, which will even just give you some kind of sense of, I don't know. Like a sense of, place, and like it's not, it's not just like a flat, moment, which is nice. In terms of metering though, like it depends. Like, I mean, usually you're able to kind of like figure it out and set it and forget it. And like, but I have an app on my phone that I use. I don't carry around a meter with me, but the phone app that I've used, I don't even know what it's called. It's called like, it's
Light
called,
meter.
photometer, light meter. I think it's called light meter. Yeah. It works totally great. And so I've never really had an issue with it. And it's like one of those, if it's not broke, I'm not going to try to fix it kind of situations.
Fair enough. Yeah, we use that app for.
The app works really well.
Yeah.
Like at first, people are like, "What?" I'm like, "No, it's actually really accurate."
It's
like,
awesome. I use it all the time.
Your phone's a good camera. It knows what it's doing with that. Yeah.
Totally. I mean, I use it for all, like almost for every single one of the shoots that I've done, like in terms of portraits and things like that, it's always almost spot on accurate, which is great.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's really good. So you see you have a dark room. So how long was it between jumping into film and doing your own dark room at home? I'm assuming you're home, but
I am at home. Yeah. So we moved into this place about a year and a half ago, and when we were looking to move, one of the things very low on the priority list was the idea that there was going to be space for a dark room. And when we found this place, it was like, oh yeah, there's not room in this house for a dark room. I'd been, developing things in my bathroom, like most people do, which is like a great place to develop things, except for it makes everything smell like Fixer. So when we got this place, there actually, where I'm sitting right now, there was a washer and a dryer, and this is like the unfinished part of the basement. So it's a great space, but it's also imperfect in that it's like very dusty and stuff like that. But we ended up moving the washer and dryer out of this space, and as a result, I was sitting, with an area that had plumbing and ventilation, and it was like, oh, and I was like talking to my partner, and she was like, so you could totally maybe put a darkroom down there, and I was like, I love you so much. and so we built it out, and I mean, like I said, there's this big sink here. It's a great space. I mean, like I made this table here. The enlarger works. I don't do as much printing as I wish that I want to, just because of the amount of time that it takes. And like, at least when you're developing, you can kind of like do other things while you're developing, but when you're printing, like, you really got to be in it. But yeah, I mean, so I've had this for about a year and a half, and it actually works out great because, like I said, the darkroom that I used to go to was the Smithsonian, and it closed down right around when I moved here. So I was looking for a new darkroom, and then we ended up, moving here and getting this, and building out this darkroom. So yeah, it's fun. It's cool to have. It's like, I mean, I hate saying this, but it's like my man cave, and like, but it's just a great space, and I'm very lucky to have a partner who is incredibly supportive of me having this area down here, because this could totally be used for storage as well, which would probably be a more useful area for it.
Yeah, it's important. We're lucky.
Yeah.
We have ours, and
Yeah, we're fortunate.
it's not in our house, but it's like down the road by 2 miles, so we're still very close to our lab.
It's awesome. It's awesome. And I mean, like, I again, there's a lot more. I could be utilizing this way better, I think, because I do actually wish that I would print more. I think that I just need to figure out a better, like, workflow for that, because the setting everything up just takes forever. And I think that that's something that I realized I took for granted at the darkrooms that I was going to, is because, like, it was like a group effort. Everybody was setting it up together, and then you're like, okay, cool, like you're able to go right away. But it's just like, getting all those chemicals together and getting them going and things like that. It takes some time, but I just need to start doing that more often.
Yeah, awesome.
It's awesome that you print in general. Some people just shoot and then they don't that's where it ends, and it's such a bummer. But seeing that you still print, you still have an enlarger and sink and all that is just amazing.
Yeah.
It's just, I mean, and I'm sure you guys know this, and anybody who's listening, print your photos, because it is the coolest thing. And it's also, if you can print them big, because it's like when the thing, you're so used to there's a lot to this, but like one of the greatest things about film and film photography in general is that, like, the physicality of it, right? Like the touchable part of it, like the tangible part of it. The fact that like when the solar flare hits the world and all of the electricity goes away, like, and all of your photos on your laptops and your cell phones go away, like the film photos will still exist. But I mean, like the idea of everybody is so used to the vapid, like disappearing nature of their pictures, like, and you shoot all these pictures and you keep them on your phones, and then your phone dies and you get a new phone, and then those pictures just go away. And you know what I mean? Like, and the idea of, I mean, every single time I've printed a photo, it's just been like okay, great. I have this, like, I'll have this forever. You know what I mean? Like, I'll have this and I'll be able to look at this later on, and I'll be able to go through these, and my daughter will be able to go through these, and I'll be able to be like, wow, okay, like these are moments that I captured. And that has always been something that, like, the end product is not the posting on Instagram. You know what I mean? Like, it's like having something that you can hold on to and look at in real life. For me, at least. I mean, like, it doesn't have to be like for everybody, but it's always been like when I finally force myself to set up my darkroom and print, it's always the most rewarding part of the entire process.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it really is. It's magical. Plus, it's like the way that film is supposed to be seen. It's like it wasn't meant to have the scan. I mean, the scans are fine, and it gets it so you can share with everybody easily, but it's like to see it the way it was supposed to be in the silver. Like, yeah, it really has a completely different look as well. I always try to explain to people, scanned
print your stuff
will look way different than when they print. They're like, oh, this looks like, I'm like, yeah, it really does. It really shows. It's so hard to explain it too. We've tried so many times to explain like the difference of like what that looks like, and it's hard to put into words until you see it and you're like, okay, that definitely is different. And I think it's just that nature of the silver that you're looking at, like physically looking at it and seeing it that way. Yeah.
Totally agree.
Really
I totally agree. It feels like, I mean, and this is, whatever. Again, I'm talking in cliches constantly, but like the idea of like listening to music on vinyl, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like it's like the fidelity of it. Like, I mean, is it as crystal clear as what you're going to listen on Spotify? No, but like there's a level of, I mean, like the hits in the vinyl, it comes with like a level of feeling, you know what I mean? And like a level of like, again, like that physicality. Like I actually very much, one of the reasons why I love the stuff that I like love the film photography and the work that I do is actually like how, not how imperfect it is, but how it, like that level of like imperfection kind of adds a level of like character and quality to it that, I mean, I could probably take these, I mean, I know I could take these photos with like a digital camera. Like that's a possibility. That's a totally thing. You could tone photos to make them black and white and, look in that way. But I mean, I think that there's a level of, like things are a little funky, or there's like a scratch in the negative, or there's that kind of stuff. I think the perfections and the imperfections, and it's like, and I think that adds a level of character to your images that I think is worth it. I think it's worth adding that variable, because those variables so often just don't exist anymore. And everything, like I said, can kind of like look the same. And sometimes when you shoot with a film camera, like none of your images will ever look the same. I mean, even if you were to take the same photo over and over again. So yeah, I really do appreciate that.
So I'm assuming all the photos, you have so many photos, and they're all kind of, in a lot of ways, bad or good, they're all historical documents because of what you're doing. Do you have just like, are you taking steps to make sure that you're preserving these photos for later, like for history? Like there's some plan in place, like custody of them, just because of the historical nature of what you're taking? That's a good question. I mean, I keep them in binders. I think that I don't know, to be honest. Now you're kind of putting me on the spot. Now I actually think that I'm just thinking,
I should probably.
Cameras are everywhere now, right? But back in the day, it was less and less the farther back you go, and like the pictures from like the beginning of the country, like that stuff's like really important because there wasn't as many, and now there's like a ton of them. But at the same time, you're still capturing history. It's literally history that you're capturing. And even if it's a picture that you wouldn't necessarily want to show somebody, or you think that has flaws or it wouldn't be published, it's history. So I'm curious, like, you know, I would consider that precious cargo, like to keep that stuff,
Yeah.
to make sure that it still survives to others to see it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very, like, I definitely take care of my negatives, and, you know, they keep them in binders and, you know, organized and things like that. I mean, it's an interesting idea of archiving them in a way that would make sure that I mean, I would like them to last forever. I love the idea of, you know, my daughter's grandchildren, like, opening them up and being like, what is this crazy device? But I also, it's interesting that you bring this up, because I think that, like, while I understand that the moments that I'm capturing are history, like, it's hard to contextualize that within like the vast number of people who are capturing those same moments at the same time. You know what I mean? Like, this history exists in so many different ways, and I think that you're right. It's important to make sure that it's preserved in a way that is, you know, saved for history. I mean, to be honest, like, it goes to the idea of printing, right? Like, the idea of making sure that you have, like, kind of physical copies of some of the photos of, like, particularly those, like, bigger moments. And that's one of the things that I've tried to do along the way. Like, when there was the impeachment inquiry, and when Donald Trump was impeached for the first time, like, I shot a ton of stuff, and I ended up putting together, like, a little, like, mini book for my team, but that I now have, you know, for my own personal use, like, that I'm able to kind of hold on to as, like, like, this is like a documentation of the stuff that I have. But I mean, which is to say, I'm not just throwing my negatives
Hope not.
into a vat of
I wouldn't
acid
think it'd be that bad.
after
Oh my
I'm
goodness.
finished with it.
I think sometimes there's folks that maybe don't realize, like, some of the stuff has, I think a lot of people, I think that we have a great amount of people that we know that don't keep or pick back up negatives. And I'm always concerned about that, because I think people don't necessarily realize you're capturing history, even if it's not, you don't think it's important. Like, you know that what you're capturing is probably important. But I think a lot of people kind of disregard that, and then they don't keep their photos. And a big part of, I think, that makes a lot of photography interesting is time. You know, I look at photos that look, you know, you look back in the 30s and the 40s, you're like, oh, look how they're dressed, look at the clothes. Like, but it's like a scene that would not look interesting today. So I think it's really important that people look at the history. We had that recently where the grandson of the gentleman that designed the Spirit of St. Louis came into our lab, and he's trying to work on a documentary about his grandfather. And his grandfather was a photographer. And he had his grandfather's binder, and he had all these loose negatives, and we're looking through these negatives, and it's just this crazy history. It's the Spirit of St. Louis being built. It's like Charles Lindbergh in the plane testing it with this photographer taking the photo of him while he's testing it. And Lindbergh's got like this crazy smile on his face. I'm like, no one's ever seen that photo before but us. Like, and you and your grandfather. Like, it's crazy when people have like this stuff. So it's like, I always want to put, like, I'm like, please keep those negatives. Like, have a place for them. But when you know that you're doing something historically significant, I feel like there's an extra level there of like making sure it survives.
Well, and it's interesting because, like, this actually circles back to the conversation that we were having about the disposable camera, which is like, that's actually one of the things that, I mean, like, I capture the lawmakers when they're, you know, in different scenarios on the Hill. But one of the things that I've actually really tried to do is capture, like, the scene around it, right? The people around it, like the people that you wouldn't necessarily capture, that you wouldn't necessarily focus on. And I think for that exact reason, because when you look back you're right. Like, when you look back at photos from the 40s or the 50s or the 30s or whatever, it's always like, it's interesting to look at the people that you know about, right? And like the lawmakers or the presidents or whatever. But it's always, I always find it more interesting to find the people around them, right? It's like, what were the people around them wearing? Like, what were the people, why were they, like, how were they dressing? Like, how were they acting? Like the scenes around, like, that actually, that stuff I find to be more compelling. And like, and to your point, like, capturing history doesn't have to be Nancy Pelosi, you know, announcing that she's going to impeach Donald Trump. Like, it can be the people around her, you know, when that's I And it's funny because, like, during the January 6th committee hearings, I was shooting a ton of 4x5, and a lot of that was like of the witnesses talking and of the lawmakers asking the questions and things like that. But I was focusing, I actually consciously focused on the people that were paying attention to the testimony, and like the people who were watching the screens. They had this enormous screen in the room, and so I have all these pictures of people like looking up and looking at the screens. Is like, I actually think that when I look back at these photos, 50 years from now, if I'm lucky enough to, be around 50 years from now, like that I feel like those are going to be the more interesting ones, like the ones of like the people that were there, like the people that you don't know, like, like what are they thinking? Like, what are they, like, what, what's the emotion in their faces is actually way more interesting than like, Adam Kinzinger going like this while he's asking a question, it's like, so yeah, but I see your point, and I think you're right. I will be more conscious of what I do with my negatives.
Not accusing you in any way, shape, or form of treating your negatives poorly.
Okay.
I just think it's important, it's just the history that's there.
No, you're right.
So kind of going back, like January 6th, were you there? You were there when that happened in the building?
Yeah.
So
Oh, wow.
you tell us a little bit about like what that was like and like.
Yeah. So it was, it was surreal. I mean, it was just a real, wild situation. I think that it was one of those situations where we kind of didn't fully grasp what was happening around us. And it was one of those things that I think kind of became more scary and traumatic as time went by. So like after January 6th, once you started seeing the videos of everything that was happening around you, I think that one of the most, the hardest moments probably around that time was actually when the Senate impeachment trial happened, and they played this video of what was happening. Like it was like a timeline video, and it was like basically just show how bad it was getting around the Capitol. And it was just, and I was like sitting in the same exact spot I was sitting in on January 6th, like in the Capitol, in our booth in the Capitol. And it was one of those things where you're just like intensely aware of everything around you that you weren't necessarily aware of in the moment. And it was really intense. But I mean, to the whole point of what I was saying earlier, where nobody's able to shoot pictures in the Senate chamber. Like there was a moment where I stepped out. So we were sheltering in place. The Capitol police officers had told us to shelter in place. And I stepped out and shot video of like the rioters who were on the Senate floor. It was a very brief moment. And one of the rioters, I didn't realize this, was like sitting in one of the first rows there, and like came up and approached me and was like, "Who are you with?" Like, asking what kind of media organization I was with, and this photojournalist actually came up and interrupted him and was like, "Hey, I'm with Getty," and allowed me to kind of like step away. That entire day was very much like a what if kind of situation. It could have gotten so much worse. I think that the people in the building, I think the country is all very lucky that it didn't get worse. I think that it could have gotten really bad. I think that, if any of the lawmakers had been encountered or captured or, anything like that. I mean, there's a lot of situations where you could look back at that day and think of how things could have gone really bad. And I mean, it was already bad. Like the whole thing was bad. Yeah. But I think that, I think that a lot of people look back at that and think, wow, like it could have just been so much worse. And so, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. It was a really tough thing to kind of wrap my head around. I think initially, because I had been covering the Hill for so long, the Capitol had been very much a safe space. It was like, your home, your workplace, like these are places that you take for granted that are kind of safe spaces. And particularly the Capitol, because it's like secure, I mean, like you go through security every day. Like, as we say, like, I like hand check my film every time I walk in. Like, it's a thing where you feel like if any place is going to be safe, it's going to be there. And for that to kind of be that kind of like, security to kind of be shattered was like a very tough thing to kind of navigate. But But yeah, I mean, it's gotten better as time goes by. And I think that, there's been a group of folks who were there that day that, we've kind of been able to like talk about it as we go, and it's been good. So
yeah, I can imagine traumatic, I would think. Did it change your work at all, like there, because of that?
So I think, it definitely for some of the portrait series that I did after January 6th, it gave a very much a personal, understanding of what the people who I was talking to and documenting had gone through. And it was a situation where I wasn't just coming in being like, hey, wow, that was a really wild experience that you encountered. Like, it was like, I understood where a lot of these folks were coming from. Not fully, obviously, like Capitol Police officers that I talked to, like they went through experiences that I will never be able to understand. Like that is just an incredibly brutal experience that they went through. And they're heroes for keeping the building as safe as it was, considering how bad it could have been. But I think it gave me a level of perspective of how fragile our democracy is, and I think that that's definitely given me a perspective as to, not that we were flippant with politics in the past, but I think that it's not all just rhetoric, words can become actions, and that's kind of what we saw happen on January 6th. And so I think it takes, it makes you kind of realize that you need to take things a little bit more seriously when in the past, I think, political speech was kind of just like considered political speech. Like this stuff actually turns into things. And that's what January 6th showed us.
Yeah. Yeah. It's such
Absolutely.
a sad part of history.
Yeah.
So kind of backing out, what's your favorite stuff to shoot when you're not in the Capitol? Like what do you aim toward? Like what's your jam if you weren't there? If you took away the Capitol, what would you be shooting?
I've actually wondered this question. I mean, predominantly and definitely my 3-year-old daughter and my partner, who are both just compelling people, and I love them so much, and I shoot way too many photos of them, and it's just it's just a fun thing. I mean, I really love being a dad, and so kind of documenting that has been a really fun experience. I have actually wondered like what I would do if I wasn't covering politics. I think I'd still cover some kind of news in some kind of way, and find a way to do that. I think I've realized that I really like portraiture, and so I think that I would probably just focus on that in some way. I don't know if that would mean doing it for news or doing it as like, people in the community or, some kind of, I like the idea of documenting history in some way. And so yeah, that's an interesting thought experiment that I haven't really gone down completely yet. But I think that also I'd probably do a lot more printing if I had the time to do it. So, I have like a lot of negatives that I could go through and start printing. But yeah, I think portraiture and like, really kind of dialing into that. I fear, and this isn't like a terrible fear, but I'd probably, because I love portraiture so much, probably end up getting into tintype, because it's like, it seems like an intoxicating, road to go down.
Oh, absolutely.
But I don't know if have you guys ever tried tintype?
No, we're familiar with the process. We used a kit that was not quite tintype and didn't work out so well for us.
Yeah,
but
I ordered a Rockland tintype kit, which gives you like maybe 5 or 10 frames or something like that. I think it was 8 frames. But you basically pour on this liquid emulsion, and it comes out like Elmer's glue, and it's like a paste essentially. But the terrible kit to start with.
that was our bad.
But we do have friends that do tintyping, and they actually teach workshops. So I think maybe one of these days
we'll tap into them for knowledge. They're Silver and Cedar. Shout out to them. We should do a podcast with them, but we didn't put it out yet. But that's all they do. Yeah, they just do tintyping, so they do it really, really well. Yeah. So there are contact people if we want to start doing it, going down that expensive road.
Definitely.
Well, that's the thing, is that
that's kept us from it more than anything. We tend to go like the cheaper stuff.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, like film photography itself is already an expensive hobby / passion / profession. So it's like, you know, the idea of building out the infrastructure for a tin type operation seems completely overwhelming. And I also like don't think I would be able to keep up. Like, I mean, you have to like, keep track of your, what is it, like your
silver.
Your silver and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, it's like that's all. I'm not in a place right now where I'd be able to do that. But if I wasn't covering politics, I guess maybe I would. I don't know. So yeah, I don't know. It's like, and it would be cool to kind of like work on kind of like larger, longer form projects. You know, I mean, I think that a lot of the stuff that I cover is very much like day of news. Like it's, you know, it's day to day. There's not like there's a cohesive thread that goes through it, which is Congress, right? And like politics and things like that. But, you know, kind of building out a project that kind of has like a cohesive vision and thread would actually be really appealing. It's something that a lot of the photographers that, you know, photojournalists that cover the Hill are not able to necessarily do because they have to focus on really like just covering the day-to-day grind. And so it would be kind of cool to step away from that a little bit, but I don't know. It's funny because like I went through this period after January 6th, particularly where I was like, you know, like I think I'm ready to kind of move on from this. Like I've been here for over 10 years. Like it's, you know, it can be a grind and like, you know, I never really expected to be covering the same place for this long of a period anyways. And I really realized that like the institutional knowledge and understanding and just like knowing the people and the place, there's a value to that. And I think that I've really kind of decided to like really lean into that and recognize how valuable that can be. Not only in photography, but just like day-to-day journalism and, you know, the editorial and the producing part of it too. So something that I've really decided to appreciate.
Oh, wonderful. Are you working all film? Or are you doing paper or dry plate at all? Any of that? Or it's all film right now?
Most of it's film. I was doing a dry plate for a bit, or glass plate. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I did that. I actually did that earlier on. Jason Lane reached out and sent like some glass dry plates. This is years ago, and I shot them around the Hill. It's really, I mean, as I'm sure you know, like it's very hard to do. Like those are very, like the sensitivity on those is very low, and so I mean, like you have to, your exposure times are, you know, not conducive to like people moving around and stuff like that. But also like, again, like to the whole point of showing a scene in a different way, like that actually showed a level of like freneticism and movement that I think was actually kind of cool in a way. Like it actually showed like a sense of like, okay, like there's movement here, there's stuff happening. It's not just like captured like specific, you know, millisecond that you're able like to capture with these crazy new cameras. Like you're actually showing like, okay, like there's something happening here. There's movement, there's people moving, there's like which I thought was really nice. But that's basically it. And most of it's film though. I mean, it's, yeah. I haven't shot any paper.
I was going to say, there's a post on your feed, just got a kind of flashback to your Instagram. I think you have a picture of the Capitol building and it looks like broken glass. Is that an actual broken glass plate? Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah. Okay.
So that was actually, it's funny and it kind of like dovetails into our entire conversation here. Cause like, it was like a representation of kind of like the way that the place was feeling at the time. And it was like one of those things where, going back to our previous conversation about making sure the medium fits the moment, like, and where, you know, you can use a different kind of medium to kind of show what's happening at that moment. Like that was like kind of the perfect way to do that. It felt like at the time. And so that was a dry plate. So it's one of these J-Lane speed plates, like these. I'm showing you now, but this is an audio podcast, so I understand that people are listening. You can't actually see what I'm showing.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I set it up. I like held my speed graphic really tightly and took like a long exposure. It was actually the day, it was a picture of the Capitol. The flag was still at half staff because of January 6th, and it was the day that the House had voted to impeach Trump for inciting the insurrection. And yeah, so I took it, developed it at home, let it dry out for like a day or two, and then set it in like I put it in like a sleeve, like a normal sleeve, and just like dropped it. And it kind of made that design. And so yeah, it's like it's like a piece that I'm particularly proud of, because I think that like it really does. It's interesting because the day that I shot it, Dick Durbin did this interview with one of my colleagues, and he was like, "This place feels shattered," and it was like, and it totally like all clicked all at the same time. Like it was like all like okay, like cool, like this could totally happen. And the thing is that I mean, like when you work with glass plates, like that kind of stuff, it just breaks. Stuff breaks all the time. And there was a self-portrait I had done of myself with my daughter when she was just a baby, and it had broken. And I scanned it just to see like what it looked like. And I was like, oh, this is like super interesting, kind of funky. And so it kind of all just kind of, meshed together all at the same time. But yeah, so that's a glass plate.
Okay. Yeah, that's a wonderful photo. And once again, so fitting. It really, really works for the subject matter. So it was a good decision on your part, to go with that. It's wonderful. Yeah.
I had a question. Does the Capitol have a dark room, or did it have a dark room at one point? And have you been in it?
So I've not been in. Well, it did. They used to. So, and they probably used to have multiple dark rooms, but so that the Stills Gallery, not to totally get into this, but the way that the press corps works on Capitol Hill is it's divided into like TV and radio, print folks, periodicals, and then the still photographers. And the still photographer gallery used to have a dark room, and they just got like basically rid of the entire stuff, like all of their material, and like they don't need it anymore. It's like they. True. I know it's sad, True. But like actually, I have it somewhere. I don't have it in here, but like one of the dryers that they had, because they would have to like basically develop this stuff and then dry it really quick and turn it around and file it. It's like this massive dryer that you hang up on the wall, and like you basically like hook your canister up to it, and it just like pumps hot air into it. So I have like a couple of the things that they used to use from there, but they don't use them. They don't have it anymore. It's interesting. There's one of the videographers for like a freelancer, when he saw I was like shooting film, he's like, "Oh yeah, I bought this like Hasselblad kit from the Capitol photographer's office, like, bunch of years back." And I was like, man, like really wish I would have been able to get one of those, because that would have been such a cool like piece of history to be able to use, especially like in the Capitol.
Oh, absolutely.
But I mean, yeah, so the answer is yes. I mean, like, and so I'm almost positive they probably had a darkroom for, because like there's a group of photographers that work for the Senate and like work for the Capitol and work for like the House. And so I'm almost positive they probably had their own darkroom situation there too. So
yeah,
but there's not one now.
So sad.
Bummer.
Sorry. I'm as bummed as you are.
Yeah.
Well, this has been wonderful, Frank. We really appreciate all the time. We have a portion that we do for listener questions. So we always ask our listeners, like, hey, what do you want to know? So we have a couple of these. We actually have three. The first one we have is from Pocketport. That's Gabe. So it's _Pocket_Port. Get his name right. So his question was, any issues getting film into secure areas? X-ray, hand check, whatever. I think we kind of covered that. I don't know if there was anything you wanted to add to that, but I think, Gabe, you got your answer earlier.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, they're pretty cool about it. It definitely depends on the door. So like there are definitely some security checkpoints that I don't go through because they're a little bit more strenuous, but the door that I go through, they know me very well. I have my little piece of paper that if I need to show it, they're cool about it. But yeah, I don't usually have issues taking it into the Capitol. Nope.
Okay. Our other question is from Slim Snapped, who is James, a friend. I like this question. Analog or smartwatch? if analog, what's your go-to watch?
Ooh, okay. I actually no, I wear a smartwatch because I have a Garmin because I like to think that I run, but I don't really run now that I have a kid and I don't have really that much time. So it's my running watch. I have an analog watch. It's like a Shinola watch that my partner got me, but I don't wear that often because this counts my steps and I like to try to keep track of that. So this is a good question though.
Yeah, I like that one. And then the other question is the Raisin Ranger, which is a wonderful handle. And that's Brant. And then he says, how's your work in the Capitol influenced your personal work?
That's a good question too. I think that, well, I mean, my work in the Capitol has definitely made my work like covering. It's interesting because like I cover my like the Capitol in a very like documentary way. Like it's very, I try to kind of stay on the periphery and kind of cover things from like the places not necessarily where all like the photojournalists would stand. And it's definitely like taught me how to appreciate like capturing those moments, capturing light. It's actually like, it's way harder to take shots in the Capitol than it is, you know, outside of the Capitol or at home. But it's probably given me like a level of confidence because again, to the whole point where lawmakers, they're okay with you like kind of shoving a camera in their faces. I've just kind of taken that level of like, okay, like I'm going to shove cameras in faces on lawmakers. I'm just like got home and I'm like, all right, I'm going to shove cameras in my family's faces. And it's actually made me a better photographer because it's actually given me the confidence to be like, hey, Dad, will you sit there and for a portrait and let me practice or something like that? Or, you know, which I think it's kind of been like a mutually beneficial thing because I think that I've learned from both. So. Yeah,
fair enough.
I think that's
That's
the way I'm going to say it.
That is a good connection there. Yeah.
Absolutely. So where are people to find you? We know you have an Instagram, and then do you have a website too?
Not one that I've actually. Again, to the whole idea of not having time to print, I also don't have time to build out my website. It exists, it's just not up. So I don't have a website. No. So yeah, Instagram's a good place. I'm on Twitter, X, I'm on Threads. Instagram, it's Frank Thorp V. And Threads is Frank Thorp V. Twitter is just at Frank Thorp, but that's a lot of like more, you know, reporting on Capitol Hill kind of things. It's less photography. And yeah, I don't really do Flickr. I used to, but I don't really anymore. So, although I hear a lot of people are going back there because they're feeling like they're sick and tired of the way that Instagram is, I don't know, doing stuff. So
Yeah.
I don't know. Where do you guys exist?
So I'm cyanotyped.com. That's my website. And then also Instagram, it's _cyanotyped_. And then
Yeah. I really don't have a personal, I had a couple and then I let them go, but one of them was a studyinblack.com on Instagram. And that was where I was doing a lot of my experimental stuff. But I've kind of not really published anything there in a while. So mostly focused on Phoenix Film Revival, keeping that rolling.
Yeah, that's where
Awesome.
all our time goes.
Yeah, that's where all their time is.
We're just trying to keep the community going.
That's great.
Yeah.
No,
Well, awesome.
absolutely.
Yeah. Good chat. Thank you, Frank, for being on. We love your work and appreciate your dedication to the craft. And in the busy life that you have, you still manage to shoot film, which is awesome. So no excuses from anybody out there. If Frank can shoot film, you can shoot film.
That's right. No, I mean, honestly, thank you guys for keeping this conversation going because I think that it's programs like yours that kind of let people who are either really into it stay into it or who are just trying to get into it learn, you know, the ways that they can kind of get into it. And I think that this is so important. I think that without, you know, people keeping this conversation going, that this is something that could, I mean, I don't even want to say it, like could die. And so I think it's important to have these kind of programs like in the program that you guys are doing as a podcast, but also like all of your teaching programs as well. Like it's great. It's so great. And so I'm more than happy to talk with you guys. It's really been wonderful.
We really appreciate you coming on. For
Yeah.
us.
we're excited. Your enthusiasm for film makes me giddy. I'm happy.
We feed off of
Yeah.
anyone
Yeah.
that's into film. Like, yes, another one.
Yes, let's go.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Frank, and hope to chat again with you soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.